the new Social Security Trustees report that just came out a few days ago for the year of 2025. So a little history for those unfamiliar. Social Security was founded somewhere in the beginning of the 20th century, I believe around the 1930s, and existed fine for 30 or 40 years until around the 70s when Reagan was in office. And they realized that they were going to have a problem with the solvency of Social Security. And that at the time, and for most of Social Security's existence, more money was being paid into the program through the payroll tax than was being paid out in benefits being paid out in Social Security benefits. Well, they realized because of the baby boom that eventually, at some point in the near future, they're going to have a problem where more money is being drawn out in benefits than is being put in payroll taxes. And so, to help rectify this upcoming problem, the Reagan administration instituted what's called the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, prior to the trust fund, when, let's say, Social Security took in $100 in payroll taxes and only had $80 in benefits to pay out, that $20 difference of what they would have, that $20 difference would be put straight into the general tax pool, right? It would go right into military funding or whatever that general tax pool that the federal government pulls from to fund the vast majority of its programs. When they instituted the trust fund, what the trust fund does is it takes any excess that they have and puts it into a trust fund. And so that trust fund can slowly build up, and that in the future, when you have years where more money is being paid out in benefits than is being paid in through the payroll tax, they can just pull from the trust fund, and there won't be any problem with the ability of the United States to pay out full Social Security benefits. Well, that trust fund accumulated for a while and started to grow, and eventually it reached that point where it reached the inflection point where more money was needing to be paid out than was being paid in because of the baby boom and whatnot. And so now we've had a number of decades in a row where more money is being paid out than is being paid into the program. And so that means that the Social Security Trust Fund is slowly being depleted. Year by year, it's more and more of it is having to be taken away to make up the difference in the payroll tax for the Social Security benefits that are being paid out. Well, it was predicted that, what the Social Security Trust Fund Trustees report does is determines the solvency of the trust fund. So they've determined they have a projected date at what time the trust fund will run out of money if nothing is done. Each year, the report seems to be pulling that date where the trust fund is going to become insolvent closer and closer to us. I believe it used to be somewhere in the 2040s, then it was in the high 2030s, and now, as far as I saw from this report, it's saying that 2032 is when their projected date of when the trust fund is going to completely run out, and that Social Security when the trust fund runs out, Social Security will still exist. So anybody who tries to claim that Social Security is insolvent or will go bankrupt or something does not understand Social Security. What will happen, though, if the trust fund runs out and it becomes insolvent, is that Social Security will only be able to pay out somewhere in the range of 80% of its benefits through the next 100 years. So what that means is if you were entitled to $100 in Social Security benefits and the trust fund runs out, you will only be able to receive $80 of your owed $100 in benefits because the trust fund is typically what would make up that $20 difference. The payroll tax is only able to cover 80% of the total benefits that are going out. Now, you may ask, why does the payroll tax only cover this amount when it used to cover more? Well, the payroll tax hasn't changed for the most part. I think it's gone through some small changes here or there over the decades, but for the most part, it's stayed around the same couple percentage. But what has not changed is the cap. So Social Security tax, the payroll tax, that money that's pulled straight out of your payroll stub, there's a cap on it. So every dollar up to $160,000 you make in income is taxed at the 3 or 4 or 5% that the payroll tax is. But every dollar you make above, I believe it's $165,000 is not subject to the payroll tax. So what that means is that was not a problem for a long time because the payroll tax captured somewhere in the low mid 90% of all income in the United States. So that 4 or 5% under 160K captured something like 93% of all income in the United States. But As inflation increases over the decades, as it naturally does, and income inequality increases, which it doesn't naturally do, but it has happened. There's been a significant increase in income inequality in the United States over the last couple of decades. There is more dollars above $160,000 per year being made than there ever has. And that's created a scenario in which only about, I believe it's somewhere in the low mid 80 percentile of all income in the U.S. right now is being captured by the payroll tax, because more money than ever before is being made above that $160,000 threshold. Now, that difference of where we're at now, about low 80% of captured income in the United States being subject to the payroll tax, where it used to be in the low mid 90 percentile, that difference of 5 to 10% is that delta is the difference between the solvency of the trust fund. It is the entire difference of the solvency of the trust fund. And so all you have to do, there's an extremely easy, straightforward, and 100% logical fix to this, and it's just to either raise or completely eliminate the Social Security payroll tax cap, which completely makes sense. I don't understand why the payroll tax cap wouldn't be indexed to at least inflation in the first place. That seems like a no-brainer to me. But on top of the inflation, you have the problem of income inequality that's only exacerbated the problem even more. So at bare minimum, the increase in the Social Security payroll tax cap needs to be indexed to inflation or in some sort of way. But that means that because it hasn't been raised, that is the obvious fix. Now, there are a couple of other fixes that people propose for this, but I think they're far, far worse and far less logical, right? There's one that involves cutting benefits. So one way you could fix the solvency of the trust fund is basically just reduce, if they're going to not be able to pay out 20% of their benefits, in 10 years or so, just cut the benefits 20% and then they'll be able to pay it out fine. Well, the problem with that is we live in the year 2025, right? We have plenty of resources, plenty of funding. There is no reason we should be cutting Social Security at this point. If anything, we should be expanding it. We have more than the ability as a society to ensure that our old retired people live a dignified, decent retirement lifestyle. Like they don't have to live in squalor. We more than have the ability to do that. So I think the idea of cutting Social Security is a non-starter for me personally. Could also increase the payroll tax cap. That's another potential proposal. But I don't like that proposal nearly as much because it shifts the burden more onto lower income people, right? The Social Security payroll tax is already arguably a regressive tax in some ways in that it's capped, right? Rich people aren't subject to that same tax. And so I don't like the idea of like just raising the payroll tax cap from 5% to 6% or whatever, because they're pulling the funding from the wrong demographics of people, the wrong socioeconomic demographics. So I don't think raising the payroll tax is it's better than cutting the funding, but I don't think it's nearly the best way to do it. I think by far the best way to handle this situation is just either raise or completely remove the payroll tax cap. I've heard some people propose the donut hole proposal for the payroll tax cap, which honestly feels pretty silly. It's better than doing nothing, but it just feels sort of like a weird wonky way of doing it. And the donut proposal is basically that like you blow a hole in the cap. So like you have every dollar up to $160,000 is subject to the tax. But then every dollar between 160 and say 250K is not subject to the tax. But then every dollar after 250K is subject to the tax. So that there's sort of this donut hole middle section that's not subject to the tax. That seems pretty stupid and unnecessary to me, but they could do that. And it would be better than doing nothing or cutting the funding. So yeah, let's see what this report has to say. What retirees need to know about Social Security's funding deficit. The 2025 Social Security Trustees report estimates that the Social Security retirement benefits might be cut by 23% in the year 2033. That estimate assumes Congress doesn't act to close Social Security's funding deficit, which in today's polarized political climate is appearing more likely. So my soft prediction of what will happen come 2033, I'd love to see if I could pull up this video in 10 years and see if I'm correct. But I have a feeling that the cynical part of me is taken over on this, and that the Republicans really, really want Social Security cut. And most of them to remove the program completely. Now, they understand that's very unpopular and that a large chunk of their constituency relies on Social Security and is in support of Social Security. So they kind of have to play this game where they like pretend like they don't want to destroy it, but also they very much want to destroy it. So like they're sort of in betweeny. I think that this gives them the absolute perfect opportunity to effectively achieve what they've been wanting to achieve of cutting Social Security, right? If cutting the actual benefits through a bill saying we're going to reduce Social Security benefits by 20% is far too unpopular for them to actually do, but it's what they want to do, this seems like a great way to get that sort of thing done without having to face the backlash of it, right? They just basically let this expire, right? This will become more urgent as 2033 becomes closer. But let's say it's 2032 or whatever, and this is like the topic of the day, and everybody's talking about it. What we're going to do about it? I think it's very convenient. It would be far too easy for the Republicans to just basically ignore it, not pay attention, not engage with it, basically do whatever they need to do to not vote and ensure that a reform, a way to fix it is not passed and that it essentially just breaks. They let it die on the vine. They let the trust fund become insolvent, and then they effectively get their 20% Social Security cut. I think now the more astute person would say, now hold on, if it's being pulled out of the trust fund, if 20% of the funding is being pulled out of the trust fund and they haven't raised the taxes, this way of cutting Social Security by 20% effectively doesn't really save taxpayers any money, right? It's not even an anti-big government move. And I would argue that it's more of a cruelty move, right? They see poor people and old people getting money through this redistributive program as inherently wrong. They lie awake at night in their bed, not being able to sleep, panicked about the idea of a poor person getting more money or more resources than they believe they're owed. And so I think that's where the cruelty factor really comes in, is I think this just touches on their desire to cut Social Security and the cruelty factor way, way too well. And I think they're most likely just going to let it die on the vine, and that they're not going to do anything, and then it's going to be a big hubbub, and you might have, or maybe you'll have a John McCain moment sort of thing where like there's a big hubbub, most of the Republicans are against it, you kind of know what's going to happen, but then you maybe have one holdout Republican who prevents all of this from falling apart or something. I don't know. It's so hard to predict that far out in advance, but assuming that the ethos of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party doesn't change significantly between now and 2033, I would predict that the Republicans are just going to let it die on the vine and let it become insolvent and make no effort to fix it because they don't want to fix it. They want it to be gone. With 2033 just 8 years away, just 8 years, just 2 whole elections, almost an entire decade, just 8 years, it's nothing. You'll most likely still be alive then if you're reading this post. So let's look at what pre-retirees and retirees need to know about this troubling situation and what they can do about it. The 2025 Social Security Trustees Report projects that old age and survivor insurance trust fund can pay 100% of retiree and survivor benefits until year 2033. At that time, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted under the trustees' best estimates. Unless Congress acts to close this funding deficit, revenues from FICA taxes paid by workers will be the only source available to pay retirees and survivors benefits. Like I said, yes, when the trust fund is not there, they no longer can pull from the trust fund to make up the difference of their Social Security benefit payouts versus the payroll tax pay-ins. And so the only funding that Social Security would get at that point is exclusively through the payroll tax and what is being paid in on a year-to-year basis. These revenues can only support 77% of the benefits needed for retirees and survivors, according to the best estimates in the report. This would result in projected benefit reductions of 23%. It's important to know that Social Security would not be completely bankrupt if the OASI and DI trust funds were depleted, as some people might think. Workers would still be paying their FICA taxes, which would fund the benefits of retirees, survivors, and disabled beneficiaries. As a result, benefits wouldn't disappear entirely, even if the trust funds were to be depleted. Yes, 100% correct. Benefits for retirees, survivors, and disabled beneficiaries are financed almost exclusively by FICA taxes, income tax on Social Security benefits, and interest on trust fund reserves. As a result, there are basically three ways for Congress to close Social Security's funding deficit: reduce benefits for future retirees, current retirees, or both, increase FICA taxes paid by workers, and or find other sources of financing, such as using the federal government's general revenues or imposing new taxes such as tariffs. I'm assuming that increased FICA taxes paid by workers and or included in that one is the raising of the payroll tax. If this article does not mention the raising of the payroll tax, I'm going to lose my goddamn mind. And it would make me think that this article is actually facetiously written as a way to try and like propagandize people into being against Social Security. If they don't actually mention it, I'm going to seriously get all conspiracy brained on this. Predictably, Democrats want to close the funding deficit mostly with tax increases, while Republicans want mostly to cut benefits. If you're eligible for Social Security retirement benefits but haven't yet started them, you might be tempted to start them as soon as possible before they're reduced. Not so fast. Delaying benefits might still be your best strategy for maximizing your expected lifetime Social Security benefits. You can analyze your best strategy should there be a benefits reduction with open Social Security, a helpful free online Social Security optimizer program. The summary of the Trustees report contains a compelling call to action. Quote, "The 2025 Trustees reports indicate a need for substantial changes to address Social Security and Medicare's financial challenges. The trustees recommend that lawmakers address the projected trust fund shortfalls in a timely way in order to phase in necessary changes gradually and give workers and beneficiaries time to adjust their expectations and behavior. Implementing changes sooner rather than later would allow more generations to share in the needed revenue increases or reductions in scheduled benefits. With informed discussion, creative thinking, and timely legislative action, Social Security and Medicare can continue to protect future generations." Well said. Congress, working Americans, and retirees should take the 2025 Social Security Trustees report as a flashing red light for a call to action. I 100% agree. I also am furious that this article did not mention the super obvious, straightforward, clear, 100% anybody who's not like anybody using their brain would think that this is the obvious best choice is to just raise or completely remove the payroll tax cap. It is the obvious solution to the solvency of the Social Security Trust Fund and our ability to continue paying out full Social Security benefits for the next 100 plus years. If we just raise this payroll tax cap to like $250,000 or something from $160,000, I'm pretty sure it makes the trust fund solvent for the next like 150 years or something. And if you remove the tax completely, I'm pretty sure this trust fund would be solvent forever. If you remove the tax completely, though, I think we would need to restructure how we do the trust fund a little bit, because you might get so much being paid into the trust fund that it would just keep growing and growing and growing into a ridiculous extent, and that there would be just tons of money sitting in this Social Security Trust Fund's account for no reason, or doing nothing, or not being as valued as it could be. Yeah, I don't think this article is being facetious. It's just they really, I think every time somebody talks about Social Security, they have to mention the raising of the payroll tax cap. They have to mention the raising of the payroll tax cap. Most people don't even know that the payroll tax is capped. Most people don't know that, most people don't know that Social Security is funded through the payroll tax. But most people don't understand even that the payroll tax is capped. Like, it's frustrating. But the obvious answer is just raising the payroll tax cap.